at this time.
We are also learning that Attorney General Merrick Garland is set to hold a news conference at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, so roughly a half an hour away. Obviously, we will bring you his comments as soon as he starts speaking. In the meantime, ABC News senior investigative reporter Aaron Kurtowski have been following the story closely from Ohio. So, Aaron, you were right beside me here. We were listening in Wilmington, Ohio, to local law enforcement saying essentially that this suspect is contained, but not giving a lot of detail as of yet as to motive.
Well, nothing about motive at all, but certainly the circumstances about what the FBI has faced over the last couple of days, ever since the raid on former President Trump's South Florida home, cannot be far from the Attorney General's mind as he is set to hold this news conference. But in Ohio, there is now an ongoing standoff between authorities and this man believed to be from Columbus, wearing body armor and a gray T-shirt, armed with an AR-15 style rifle and also a nail gun that he brandished when he allegedly tried to break into the FBI Cincinnati office. From there, he led police on a chase along Interstate 71 in Ohio, exiting the interstate somewhere near Wilmington. And as he did, according to State Trooper Dennis Nathan, who we heard from just a moment ago, shots were fired from that vehicle, and more shots were fired and exchanged with officers a short time later. No officers have been hurt. They believe now to have the man surrounded in a cornfield near Wilmington.
Okay, and just to recap, of course, we mentioned that the USAG will be speaking at 2:30, roughly a half an hour away. We do not yet know the subject of what he will be saying.
We don't, and it's certainly possible he may want to denounce such violence as we have seen today in Ohio. He may want to express his concerns, as the FBI Director Christopher Wray had yesterday when he was asked about the ongoing threats to federal agents. He also has been under pressure, Garland has, by Republican and Democratic lawmakers to say something about what predicated the raid on the former president's home in Florida on Monday morning, when agents showed up unannounced as part of what sources told us was an investigation into how classified material was handled. Within the last hour or so, the New York Times has reported, and ABC News can now confirm, that there was a subpoena in that case issued by the Justice Department. So there were investigative steps that preceded such an invasive step like
there would
raiding.
Almost have to be, right?
You'd think there would have been, and now we're able to confirm it. And perhaps Garland will discuss that, or perhaps he will say absolutely nothing about that at all.
And to your point, under such political pressure, it seems like Democrats wanted him to be pushing further, faster. And then, of course, we now know there are many on the right who see that raid in Mar-a-Lago as extremely excessive.
And you have to believe that it's something that the Attorney General did not take lightly, if in fact he was in on authorizing this raid, as many have speculated that he would have been, given the sensitive nature of sending FBI agents unannounced to the former president's home. But if classified material is involved here, Deirdre, we know that's something that the Justice Department takes very seriously, and I'd expect you'd hear the Attorney General reiterate that belief as they move through this case.
And also, to your earlier point, we have to assume at some level he will roughly say, please do not attack FBI agents in the field. I mean, I don't know if he can be that blunt about it, but it seems like that's a more than fair statement to make.
There have been a number of incendiary statements about the FBI made by politicians in the last couple of days following the raid on the former president's home. It is an extraordinary event undertaken by the FBI, and it may well be predicated on an extraordinary circumstance, and that's what Garland's been under pressure to explain. But the Justice Department's long-standing policy has been not to discuss criminal investigations unless and until there are charges, and as of yet, in this particular case, there have not been.
We heard from our colleague Brad Garrett earlier, who was a former FBI agent, saying sometimes they can't say anything because it would be illegal to say something. So they're a little bit between a rock and a hard place.
Especially if classified material is involved. So we'll see what the Attorney General decides to do. But there clearly is a concern in the country now, as evidenced by what's going on in Ohio, even though, again, we do not know what the motive here was after a man from Columbus attacked allegedly, the FBI office in Cincinnati and then led police on this chase that ended in Wilmington, Ohio, along Interstate 71. Shots being fired, no officers hurt. The man himself may have a gunshot wound to the leg, but he's still said to be mobile and at last check holding the rifle in his lap. FBI hostage negotiators are on scene now trying to bring this to peaceful resolution. And
you told us to, via your reporting, that so far the situation is contained, and we also heard that from the local authority, that within this perimeter, this is a contained situation, so the public is not, in theory, at risk.
That's right, but they have instituted a lockdown in this 1 mile radius of the scene so that people who live around there can stay behind closed doors, lock their doors, they've been told, until this is all brought to an end.
Aaron, thank you. As always, Aaron Katarski joining me there. We are going to follow up, continue this conversation with a former federal prosecutor, Ken Nowadaye, back with us. Ken, thanks so much for continuing the conversation with us as well. Walk us through, if you don't mind, the reasons why an attorney would like to plead the fifth. I'm going to actually just ask you a quick follow-up, if you don't mind, Ken, on this standoff in Ohio. It seems too big to ignore. As somebody who would have been bringing cases, what are your thoughts on this suspect, this alleged suspect that we've been discussing?
Well, I think it's just a terrible situation, right? You have potential violence against law enforcement agents who were just trying to do their job, and as it's been said, there's been a lot of inflaming the public against the day-to-day job that FBI agents and law enforcement agents do in this country every day, and it's just not helping the temperature in the country.
Well, Ken, thank you for fielding that. Obviously, we want to talk to you more about the FBI search at Mar-a-Lago, but it just seemed crazy to have you here and not ask you about what's happening as we are following these live developments in Ohio. But getting back to the FBI going to Mar-a-Lago, as a former federal prosecutor, what were the stakes for that search? I mean, what does it tell you about the stage of the investigation?
Well, it tells me, one, that they are at the public point, the overt point of their investigation. It's no longer really covert. When you do a search warrant, well, you're kind of announcing potentially to the world that somebody is under investigation, that you have a criminal investigation going on. So typically, when you do a search warrant, you're going to be ready for kind of public scrutiny, potentially, to your criminal investigation. So that's number one. I think they've gone from being a covert investigation to being an overt investigation.
Now, Republicans are demanding more information from the Justice Department. The former president and his legal team should have copies of the warrants and a list of what was taken. Do you think they would consider releasing it themselves?
It's something they can consider, but frankly, I don't think there's a point to releasing that information. Number one, it's probably not going to have enough information in it because the warrant is a pretty limited document. All it's going to have is the place to be searched and what you can search for. So it's not going to have the juicy details that the agent affidavit will have. And that document, the former president does not have, his lawyers don't have. That document is actually under seal at the courthouse.
So the one that the public would want to see, that everyone would want to see, is a different document?
Exactly.
Okay, very well put. Ken, thank you so much. Ken Nowadaye joining us there. We appreciate your lending us your expertise. Want to shift gears and continue focusing on this rise in monkeypox cases. The CDC confirming the U.S. has surpassed 10,000 infections. Health officials are scrambling to contain the outbreak. This is coming as one case of polio has been detected in upstate New York as well. And while COVID cases appear to be plateauing across the nation, there are certainly a lot of general health concerns in the country. To help break it all down, we bring in right now Dr. Simone Wilds, infectious diseases specialist at South Shore Health in Massachusetts. Dr. Wilds, thanks so much for joining us. As we just referenced here, the CDC reporting there is at least 10,000 confirmed monkeypox cases in the U.S. Who should get vaccinated?
Thank you for having me. Yes, as we see, the cases are increasing, and the group that we really want to focus on that needs to get vaccinated are men that have sex with men, gay and bisexual individuals. Now, I definitely don't want to make others think that they are the only ones, because other people can get it. But this is the group right now that I think we need to give extra attention to and make sure we make the vaccines available to this group, as this is the highest risk group right now.
Now, the FDA responded to the vaccine shortage by authorizing basically a way to stretch one dose into 5 separate adult doses. So first of all, how is this happening mechanically? I mean, what does that change? I'll ask you that first. Somebody, when he or she goes into a doctor's office, what happens? What should that person expect?
So what the individuals are going to see is that they're going to get the vaccines intradermally, and that is just really between layers of the skin on the hand or the forearm. And normally the vaccines were given in the muscle, like right into the skin versus underneath the layers of the skin. And really it's just, for lack of a better word, is to stretch the vaccine so we can accommodate more people, because right now the demand is greater than the supply. I will say that this method works really effective, so people should not be concerned that, they're getting a lower dose. It's just that we're making sure that we can accommodate more people with the vaccine.
Oh, you read my mind, because I was going to ask, I think there's a certain logic to, if I'm getting 1/5 of the dose, maybe it's less effective, but you're saying that's not the case.
No, that's definitely not the case. The skin has special cells that actually help to boost the immunity of the vaccine. So you're going to be covered whether you've gotten it intradermally or you've gotten it subcutaneously.
Dr. Wiles, we went down this pretty scary list, right, between monkeypox, polio. Obviously, we're still dealing with COVID, but I want to ask you about this one case of polio that's been identified in upstate New York that is in an unvaccinated adult. So how concerned are you? How can people protect themselves? Is that something people should be making appointments with their doctors now to discuss?
I think we definitely need to be concerned about the case of polio in New York. I will mention that, we have seen that there has been cases in London, and they have actually taken steps to give boosters to children. I really would encourage those who have not had their children vaccinated, or they themselves have not been vaccinated for polio, that they go ahead and do so. I mean, polio was eradicated back in the 1970s. I can recall seeing pictures of individuals in braces, and then people are telling me they had polio. We got vaccines, we're able to eradicate it. But now that we're seeing cases, I think everyone needs to make sure that they get their children vaccinated, get themselves vaccinated, especially as we get ready to have the children go back to school.
Dr. Wiles, is this something that when, for example, a parent brings a child to a pediatrician's office, is this one of the vaccines that is somewhat automatically given, or do people need to ask for this separately?
It's usually one of the ones that are given automatically, and then parents can decline. These vaccines have been safe, they've been effective, and they work really well. So, sometimes parents might have questions, but I think when you think about the most severe complication that you can get from polio or poliomyelitis, you can get paralysis where your body parts don't move as well, or some people can even die because your muscles for breathing don't work as well. So I think this is something that we can avoid. We have seen the benefits of how well the vaccine works. And so really something that I would encourage parents to have their children vaccinated.
Dr. Simone Wiles, thank you for sharing a wealth of information. We need to hear it. Thank you very much. We are going to take a quick break. We are, of course, expecting remarks from Attorney General Merrick Garland shortly, about 15 minutes away. Not entirely sure what the subject matter will be, but obviously as soon as he starts speaking, we will bring you his comments live. In the meantime, more news coming up.
With so much at stake in our world right now, we wanted to thank you for your trust and for making ABC News America's #1 news.
And thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news. Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues, The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
Admit it, these days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart that he did this.
It's the time of suspicion.
The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
As a professional athlete, you want to do stuff that's awe-inspiring, death-defying.
I continue to chase that feeling, but there's an absolute moment of leap of faith.
To be an elite adventure athlete, you have to push past the fear to achieve a transcendent experience. Sometimes the only way to find the edge is to go over it.
As consumers grapple with inflation, new data points show it may be slowing. Wholesale prices rising 9.8% in July compared to a year ago. But the bright spot, wholesale inflation fell 0.5% in July versus the previous month. As for the big picture, we bring in ABC News business reporter Alexis Christoforous and ABC's Zareen Shah with me now. So, Alexis, prices still unusually high, inflation cooling, but not in every category. Who's still missing?
Yeah, you're right. Not in every category for sure. First, just big picture on these two inflation reports this week. They're showing that inflation is decelerating. Let's not be fooled. Inflation still at elevated levels, near 4-decade highs, but at least we're moving in the right direction. A big reason why we saw that deceleration in higher prices is because of energy. We saw gas prices come down quite a bit. They're now down, I think, 51 days in a row, and now averaging a little less than $4 a gallon nationwide. But still, we are all paying more for food at the grocery store, just down about every aisle you go. Also at restaurants, prices are higher. And rent, which is a big component of inflation, rent prices continuing to move higher. So not a lot of relief for folks. This is broad-based inflation, Deirdre.
And Alexis, you've spoken about this in the past, but rent and groceries in particular, two things that people really can't budget on. I suppose a little bit with groceries, but not so much with rent. You mentioned that price of gasoline coming down, a big relief to all drivers. Is it likely to stay lower?
Well, we can hope, but you know, energy is a very volatile thing, and a lot of different things can move them, namely hurricane season, which we're going to be in the thick of pretty soon. Depending on the severity of that, we could see refineries pull back or shut down. That would take much needed oil off the market. Any geopolitical event could also impact how much oil is on the market. So it's always a supply and demand game. Right now, a lot of drivers, especially in the U.S., are driving less, even though it is this busy summer driving season, because of these higher prices. So for now, we're under $4 a gallon nationwide. I don't think I'd bet the house that it's going to stay that way through the rest of the summer.
All right, Alexis, thank you. Zareen, bringing you in on the political angle. We heard President Biden say yesterday inflation is beginning to, quote, moderate. Polling has not been in his favor. How is this likely to play out, especially as we go towards midterms?
Yeah, Deidre, listen to his exact words, though. Biden said there were some signs inflation may be beginning to moderate. So incredibly cautious with his words. He made it clear that there was still work to be done, that we're still far from over. And then he goes into talking about the global challenges, as if to say, look, I'm doing everything I can at home. There's still a whole world of possibilities out there, right? He mentioned the Ukraine war. He talked about the supply chain issues that still exist. And then he talked about the COVID-19 shutdowns that are still taking place in Asia, as if to paint a picture, look, in the months ahead, things still might be murky. They're a bit unclear. So not exactly touting this as a win, but certainly not a loss, right? And he's sort of showing a sense of opportunity as well, telling the House that they need to pass the Inflation Reduction Act.
Zareen, thank you. Alexis, thank you. Glad to have you both here. We do want to remind you we are expecting remarks from Attorney General Merrick Garland shortly, about 10 minutes away. We are not sure the exact subject matter. We will bring you his comments live as soon as he starts speaking. More news when we come back.
As a professional athlete, you want to do stuff that's awe-inspiring, death-defying.
I continue to chase that feeling, but there's an absolute moment of leap of faith.
To be an elite adventure athlete, you have to push past the fear to achieve a transcendent experience. Sometimes the only way to find the edge is to go over it.
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
With so much at stake in our world right now, we wanted to thank you for your trust and for making ABC News America's #1 news.
And thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
He thought he was God.
He's now one of the most vilified men in the world. He is the everyman. Zelensky is the Tom Hanks of Ukraine.
The fact that a little nice Jewish boy is 5'7" is showing up this KGB agent in the Kremlin.
What do you say to Americans who see Russia and you not only as a rival, but an unfriendly adversary?
Two men at war.
Which Vladimir will take over. The world is not going to be the same.
So what's good to read this summer? Well, Kate and I have decided to jump in and help you.
And we're talking with Oprah, John Irving, and so many popular authors and influencers.
So we want you to join us. Myself, Charlie Gibson, and my daughter, Kate Gibson.
Oh, hey, that's me.
That is you. For the new podcast series, it is called The Bookcase with Kate and Charlie.
We will make sure you love what you read.
Listen anywhere and anytime. The Bookcase Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. It is one of the highest stakes House races of the midterm cycle. Wyoming will be the center of the political universe next week. Crossing former President Trump, will it prove to be a career killer for Congresswoman Liz Cheney? ABC News politics reporter Brittany Shepard traveling to Wyoming to speak with voters and has this story.
At the county fair in Cheyenne, you'll find dairy goats, cowboy boots, horse shows,
you in the gray shirt,
and even a children's magic show.
Now I'll show you guys it's gone.
You'll also find plenty of angry voters who say their Congresswoman Liz Cheney has pulled a disappearing act of her own.
After she jumped in on the January 6th thing and she jumped in on the impeachment, she was nowhere to be found. She wasn't meeting with the people. She doesn't care about us.
She has become totally obsessed with getting Donald Trump.
President Trump is a 76-year-old man. He is not an impressionable child.
It may seem obvious that Republicans in the state that Trump carried by nearly 70 points are ticked.
Thank you very much, Wyoming.
That Cheney has turned on Trump.
And it's going to cost her big time in the election.
But that's not the whole story.
She's tone deaf to even listening to us.
Myrna Burgess says Cheney's support of Biden's gun legislation is putting proof she's out of touch.
When she starts voting against the Second Amendment, that is a total deal breaker.
Do you think Liz Cheney is for Wyoming?
No,
her polling's pretty
she doesn't
low.
even live in Wyoming. She's absolutely not for Wyoming, and she is a total rhino just like her dad.
As for the charge that Cheney is MIA, Trump-backed challenger Harriet Hageman is taking aim.
I am the only candidate that has traveled around this state.
But the thing is, Cheney is in the state, evidenced by photos on social media instead of big tent rallies.
She has to have private events that are not announced to the general public because of her safety. And that's a crying shame that somebody stood up for what they believed in Congress, and they are now in a position where they have to worry about their safety and their family's safety. What she has done for Wyoming truly does matter.
State Rep Landon Brown, a Cheney surrogate, says that this race is about the existential choice facing the grand old party.
This is our Constitution. This is our history. This is what we're going to be remembered for. And that's exactly what Liz is remembering. And unfortunately, you know, everything lands in Wyoming's lap right now.
And interesting twist about Wyoming is that voters can change their party affiliation right at their polling places. That means Democrats can weigh in on Liz Cheney's race in a major way. And here in Laramie, a place progressive by Wyoming standards, it's happening.
I've never received these kind of mailers, and certainly not in this abundance for one race ever.
Laramie Democrat Connie Wilbert has received stacks of mailers urging her to make the switch. In Connie's neighborhood, Cheney yard signs are abundant. She says most belong to lifelong liberals like herself.
While I disagree with her on virtually everything else, all policies, I respect the heck out of her for taking this stand.
Voter Megan Hayes, who also made the switch, says these are unusual times.
Lifelong Democrat, but registered as a Republican for the primary?
For the first time in my life, I am a registered Republican. Yes, ma'am, yes. That gave me a little bit of a rash, but I did it.
Could Wyoming Democrats save Liz Cheney's hide? Analysts at 538 say the math doesn't add up. A whopping 70% of voters in the state are registered as Republicans. And in every midterm election in the past decade, more than 80% of primary votes cast have been for GOP candidates, meaning even those who haven't declared their party affiliation likely lean red.
There was criticism of her.
University of Wyoming political science professor Jim King put it this way.
If one candidate wins by 5,000 votes, those Democrats who switched had no real sway. If the race is decided by 500 votes, well, then those people would have perhaps had an influence.
Tough odds aren't stopping some Democrats from trying.
It may not make any difference, but I just had to vote for Liz. You know, she's got a real uphill battle.
Voters in the least populous state in the country now poised to have an outsized impact on the wide-open fate of the Republican Party.
Brittany Shepard, thank you so much. I'm Deirdre Bolton. Attorney General Merrick Garland expected to speak about the search of former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate shortly, in just the next 3 minutes. Of course, we will bring you his comments live as soon as he begins speaking. More news next.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
These days, with so much going on, it's hard to keep up.
While others are recapping yesterday's headlines,
we're bringing you the right now.
This is the busy border crossing. Steel barricades, another strike.
The right now look at the day ahead, how it affects you and your family.
Record high gas prices.
The threat of cyber warfare.
Is peace possible?
World News Now beginning at 2 a.m. Eastern, followed by America This Morning.
America's #1 early morning news.
Streaming here on ABC News Live.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers
in Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news.
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now. Streaming live. Authorities monitoring online threats following the FBI's Mar-a-Lago raid. Plus extreme weather, damaging flash flooding from east to west. The dramatic new video. Streaming now free on ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
How cute.
Yes.
So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
America is being poisoned with fentanyl, and we don't even know it.
Just heard my wife screaming. She told me they had just died.
50 to 100 times more potent than morphine.
Keep breathing, come on. It's poison, it's pure poison.
A few grains of salt worth of fentanyl will kill you.
Just my agency has seized enough to kill the entire country.
ABC News Live presents Poisoned, America's Fentanyl Crisis. The powerful series, streaming free on ABC News Live. ABC News, America's #1 news source.
I'm Deirdre Bolton. We begin with breaking news in just a few minutes. Attorney General Merrick Garland expected to make a statement to the press. Sources telling ABC News that he is expected to address the FBI search conducted earlier this week in Florida's Mar-a-Lago estate. We will, of course, bring you his comments live as soon as he starts speaking. In the meantime, I want to bring in my colleague, Zoreen Shah. She is standing by in Washington, D.C. So, Zoreen, we've talked a little bit roughly about what is expected. Do you know more from your sources in D.C.?
You know what, he just announced maybe in the last hour that he was going to speak. It's so unknown exactly what he's going to say, but we know he's had a lot of pressure to speak out ever since the search in Mar-a-Lago, in Donald Trump's house. So he has been getting a lot of pressure, and maybe some people are interpreting his silence as meaning something. So we know he will be speaking in the next few minutes. It's going to be really interesting to see what he actually says there.
And Zorina, one thing that our colleague Aaron Katersky, who was sitting right beside me here, was saying we may hear from the USAG essentially a plea to not take out anger against FBI agents or Department of Justice officials or workers in the field, because we have seen, at the very least, this outcry on social media, and we have also seen an incident in Ohio that may or may not be related. I should note, we have no sourcing that says it's related at all, but there is somebody who tried to break in, apparently, to the FBI Cincinnati office and who is in a live standoff with police outside of Wilmington, Ohio, as we speak. So what are the chances we do hear this direct plea, which is, okay, you may be angry about this search warrant at Mar-a-Lago, but please don't go after FBI agents in the field?
I think a lot of people would suspect that's maybe the most likely thing that he'll first say, right, addressing what just happened. But we truly don't know. I mean, look, he hasn't given even a clue as to what he might be saying, despite the amount of pressure that he's been receiving the last few days. We know that there's been a lot of Republicans and a lot of people who aren't even Trump allies have come out in a push to hear what he has to say, what the Department of Justice, with Attorney General, with the head of the FBI has to say about this specific raid. And the fact that this has never also happened before in American history, Deidre, right? I mean, the fact that, you know, this is the very first time we've seen a search in a former president's house, it's unprecedented. These types of things happen a lot. They are normal, but what makes this so not normal is the fact that it's a former president. So there is a lot of pressure for him to speak, and we'll see what he says when he gets up there on the podium in just a few moments.
Yeah, Zorina, super important point there. We are joined as well by our colleague, Chief Investigative Reporter Josh Margolin. Josh, what are you expecting the U.S. AG to say? Obviously, moments away is what we're expecting.
Well, clearly, Deidre, he's going to want to, as Irene said, he's going to want to express the need for calm and ask people to not target law enforcement officials. And we have seen a really intensifying environment online where people are calling for violence. It's really, really unsettling. And experts in law enforcement are watching it, and they're watching it very, very closely. They are concerned that we are in a situation where there could be violence. Important to remember that Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, is somebody who remembers the Oklahoma City attack. He helped lead the investigation of that attack, and that attack was targeting law enforcement, federal law enforcement. That's what the bomber 27 years ago was aiming for, to go after federal law enforcement. A lot of other people were killed. This Attorney General knows the repercussions of violent rhetoric targeting federal agents, and it's serious out there. And I think he's going to have a hard time avoiding talking about specifics of the case. He clearly won't reveal things he's not allowed to reveal, and he clearly will try to make sure that he stays in a space outside of getting into critical investigative details. But the country is clamoring for what was the backstory that led to this unprecedented FBI search this week.
Yeah, Josh, that's a great point. As many experts have told us, as well as our own reporting, is that it had to be ironclad, right? We have to understand that whatever the FBI agents went to Mar-a-Lago to retrieve, that there was no doubt that there was material there. Is that what your sources are confirming?
Absolutely, and in fact, we now have it confirmed that there was a subpoena earlier this year as a predicate predating this search. And that's typical in a federal investigation. You have a request, then you get a subpoena, and then if you need to, they go ahead with the search. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, Chris Wray, the FBI Director, these are not reckless men. These are men who have been in law enforcement for years. Merrick Garland particularly is somebody who is an expert in the law, who is somebody who is calm and thoughtful, and is almost viewed as something akin to sage-like, given his long history on the federal appeals court. The truth is that there is likely, we don't know for sure, certainly, there is likely a lot of valid information behind the scenes. The key now is for the Justice Department to give some understanding to the American public of what was done this week in the name of federal law enforcement.
Josh, that's a great point about Merrick Garland's character, because we know even for some on the left, he was too calm, right? They felt like he was slow walking a lot of issues that had to be addressed or not dealing with them. Of course, now we've heard on the right Republicans blasting the decision essentially to go to Mar-a-Lago. So as usual, a very split opinion on recent events from this week, Josh.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, this is something that we and other reporters have been critical or questioning about in recent years. Federal investigations need to be conducted with a level of secrecy. You want to protect the innocent. You want to let law enforcement do its work. But there are many times that we have seen that the secrecy works against good law enforcement and makes people question whether the government's action are in fact valid. That's very, very important. There are some state law enforcement, agencies that operate with much more openness than the federal system. And this is absolutely a moment where Merrick Garland has to balance the two things: the validity and the secrecy and the sanctity, so to speak, of the investigation. And he has to balance that with the public's need to know, because at bottom, the FBI, the Justice Department, cannot do their work without public support. If the public support is eroded, they can't do their work. He has to figure out a way to thread that needle. And look, there are people who have known Merrick Garland for years, and if anybody could do it, he is perceived to be the type of person who could, because he is not a rash person. He has great experience. He has great judgment as a judge. He had great judgment as a prosecutor and a law enforcement official. People perceive him to be the right kind of person. Now, he may fall short today. He might go ahead and not, explain enough about what went on here this week, and it may yet just lead to additional criticism, a compounding of it. We don't know, but certainly he felt, given what happened in Cincinnati and given what's been going on online in the last couple of days, and given the rallying that was done yesterday in Southern California, that this is an opportunity where he not only has to speak, but he issued an announcement that he was going to speak, and it was going to be in an hour or 90 minutes. That's very unusual.
Very unusual, so worth pointing out indeed. Josh, Zorine, I'd like to bring you in on that last point. Unusual in many respects, as you pointed out, another issue. But one thing I'm curious about is, will the White House comment? Is the White House expected to comment after the AG speaks?
We haven't heard anything about that yet. Look, Biden is on vacation right now. There's no signs that he's going to be speaking out about this. It looks like this is just going to be the Attorney General for now. That's what we know. But I think it's also striking the fact that we were expecting some of these. We were talking about some of the attacks, some of the threats. We were expecting some of these threats to happen after that search, right? I mean, law enforcement agencies were looking for that online. They were preparing for acts of violence as well. And then we have that in Ohio today, in Cincinnati. You have that standoff between that armed man who exchanged gunfire with authorities, who tried to enter the FBI building and then got away. I mean, it's striking that this is happening. It's going to be interesting to hear if Mayor Garland actually talks about that very specific case that happened today.
Okay, hang tight, Zareen and Josh. We want to bring in Jeff Robbins. He is joining our conversation right now, litigation partner at Sol Ewing Arnstein Lear and former Chief Minority Counsel, U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. So we're still waiting on details from officials. Jeff, what are you going to be listening for?
Well, I think Josh is right to stress the word balance. It is threading a needle. That's what the Attorney General has got to do. This is a highly unusual thing for him to do, for the Attorney General to comment on the execution of a search warrant. It's obviously highly unusual that we're in this circumstance that we're in. My guess is that he's not going to permit himself to be peppered by questions about, say, what was in the affidavit, what was the probable cause, the identity of the informant, apparently, or informants who provided the Department of Justice with the evidence that more documents were being withheld. I would expect a calming or a statement or an attempt to calm the criticism that has arisen in certain quarters. Look, we all know we have a domestic extremism problem in this country. We've had it for several years. The former president has stoked it. His people are continuing to stoke it. At some level, he is continuing to stoke it. So I would expect him to do his best to provide some basic information about what happened earlier this week and why, without getting very much into detail.
Well, as you said, Jeff, a perfect phrase, right? Thread the needle. Josh said it as well, because people want to know. They want to know, even people who are not particularly political, they want to know, why was this authorized? Why did that search warrant get signed off on? What did the FBI find at Mar-a-Lago?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised for the Attorney General to reiterate what so many of us have been reiterating for the last several days, namely that what this is an order signed by a federal judge upon a very detailed and specific showing that A, there was probable cause to believe that a specific federal crime or crimes were committed, and B, that there was evidence at this location, specific evidence, identified evidence of that crime. And hopefully, my guess is, by providing that kind of basic information, the Attorney General can at least take some steps in tamping down some media. I don't know how successful he's going to be in doing that, because there are the obvious people who have an obvious interest in stoking that mania. But my guess is he's going to take at least some level of shot at it.
But Jeff, to your point, the reasons for going to Mar-a-Lago, they had to be absolutely ironclad, right? This cannot be exploratory. It's like 99.9% sure there was material there.
You are so right. This clearly was the most thoroughly vetted search warrant application in the history of search warrants, developed over weeks, if not months, by the FBI and the Department of Justice, approved at the highest levels of each agency, and only then submitted to a federal judge for approval. And you can be sure that that federal judge did more than just scan that application for a search warrant.
So, Josh, I'd like to bring you in on Jeff's point there. We all agree, as experts, as reporters from sources, this had to be ironclad. Yet, as Jeff pointed out, maybe some people are going to believe that, and maybe some people won't. From a political perspective, how do we move forward?
Well, it's very, very difficult. This is all in a polarized environment, which this environment right now is so dangerous and delicate, and it's so supercharged with calls for violence. That's why I think, as somebody who's been watching this for years, this Attorney General must have really, scrutinized this question of going in for a search and then bringing it to a judge this week. That's why I personally don't think, based on my knowing this Attorney General and our covering of him, that he's somebody who would have allowed this to happen in a rash way, because he had to know that as soon as this happened, it would supercharge a supercharged environment. And in fact, that's what we saw. As soon as President Trump put out confirmation on Monday that the raid had been done and was underway, we immediately started seeing factions on the far right, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, militia organizers, calling for violence, as they always have done, against Jews. The Attorney General is Jewish. against the FBI, federal law enforcement, against other perceived enemies they perceived to be enemies of President Trump. It was like clockwork. And then by the next morning, there was already a body of evidence online of this really ugly, terrible, violent rhetoric that had law enforcement incredibly concerned. You cannot believe for a second that the Attorney General and his senior staff at the Justice Department, that they at all were blind to what was going to happen in the wake of this type of a search.
Zareen, I want to bring you back in on a potential White House reaction, because you highlighted this earlier, and I'm just reading this off my phone, but a White House official confirming that the White House learned about this upcoming USAG statement from the press. And as you rightly pointed out, Zareen, I mean, the president is on vacation. So according to your sourcing, we are still unlikely to hear from the White House after the USAG speaks?
There's no indication as of right now that we'll be hearing from the president. As you said, he is on vacation. And that's right. The White House just did say that they learned about the AG statement from the press. You know, we know he went on vacation yesterday. The last time he talked about anything was to talk about inflation, right? This entire week, every time we've heard Biden speak, we've heard him speak multiple times, he has not said the word Trump. At least I haven't heard him say that word. He's avoiding talking about the former president. Instead, he's touting his accomplishments. He's talking about inflation. He has some good things to highlight there. So he is focusing on that versus his predecessor.
Yeah, there are good data points, as we have been talking about, economically speaking. Jeff, getting back to Department of Justice, what steps could the Department of Justice be taking today? What options are there on the table?
Well, my guess is that one of the things which has been happening and will continue to happen is that the Department of Justice will hear from people who up until now have been reluctant to come talk to them about what they know. Part of the benefit, frankly, of what has occurred is that there are people who are going to reconsider their recalcitrance to cooperate in this investigation, believing that they may be in jeopardy. One can infer that there are people at Mar-a-Lago within the office of the former president who have some level of concern these days that they may face some jeopardy as a result of their role in withholding what obviously was withheld, in aiding and abetting the withholding of what obviously was withheld. So I would imagine that one of the things that's happening these days is that the people who are handling this investigation at DOJ are starting to hear from individuals, or more likely the lawyers for individuals who may feel as though they have some information to share.
So essentially, Jeff, you're saying that some people who may have information may be pressured more or less to share because they don't want to be charged.
Well, whether they're pressured or not, there's no doubt as of this week that there's a bona fide, serious federal investigation going on, Department of Justice investigation going on into this matter. And therefore, those who have some knowledge or maybe played some role, perhaps inadvertently, in the withholding of these records over and over and over again since January, which is what has occurred, that those individuals may, whether as a result of pressure or just because they think it's in their self-interest to do so, decide that, you know what, enough is enough. I've got information about how it is that over and over and over documents that shouldn't have been withheld were withheld. And the best thing for me is to cooperate with the Department of Justice.
Jeff, hold that thought. We want to bring in former FBI agent, ABC News contributor Brad Garrett. Brad, does it matter to a certain extent what these documents show, or is it the fact that they were classified and taken from the White House?
Well, I think it's both. I'm only going to speculate that to go to the immense trouble the FBI had to do to even write the search warrant, let alone get it approved, is that it would have to be some pretty serious stuff. You know, when you get up way above top secret, you get into potential and imminent damage to the U.S. national security. Now, that can mean, I suppose, a lot of different things, but I think that whatever they were going after a couple days ago was some pretty serious, sensitive stuff that they felt like could not stay out there any longer, and believed that it could well disappear. And again, they're probably basing that on first-person witnesses that have watched these documents disappear, or the president, former president, or others talk about damaging or getting rid of these documents because of perhaps their incriminating nature. Who knows? But I think it's potentially a pretty big deal what they were after. Whether they got that or not is another story, of course.
So, Josh, picking up on what Brad just said, there has been talk of their documents being destroyed. I mean, so that is concern, is it not?
Well, absolutely. We don't know, again, what was in the affidavit, but a search without giving somebody a heads up in advance, that is perceived to be probably the most aggressive thing that law enforcement does. They can ask for something voluntarily. They can issue a subpoena that tells you, hey, you have to turn these documents over, and then they go and search. We know that there was a subpoena. There had to be a reason. The public can argue about the validity of that reason and whether, when we finally find out about it, whether it was enough to warrant this type of a search. But we can be sure that the Justice Department and the FBI, Brad knows from when he was an agent, they were certain in their minds that they had to go in aggressively to get the documents because there was a risk that if they gave somebody a heads up, the documents would just not be there. They wouldn't be turned over, perhaps destroyed. That's why they do this. You can't vouch for the FBI or the Justice Department. They might have done it wrong. They might have done it badly. We'll learn about that in due time. But they had to convince a judge not only was it legitimate what they were looking for, but that the method of going ahead with a search was legitimate.
So the method was legitimate. Of course, it would have to be. I've seen on social media, Josh, where all things are true, like, oh, well, whatever these papers are, it better be really important to go through all of this, an unprecedented warrant.
It's certainly, you'd expect that, but we're talking about classified information. I mean, we know that there's too many documents, too much information that's classified in this country. But we have seen a lot of investigations. We don't know what's in there. There may well be some document they were looking for that's connected to another investigation because the former president is connected to a number of investigations. Just speculating. Obviously, we know he could be connected to the January 6th thing. He could be connected to something else. But just the whole idea that it's not enough, looking for classified documents, we could very easily start coming up with classified documents that would be or could be important enough to warrant a search. Again, it's this lack of information that people are reacting to. That's why the Attorney General is doing this unprecedented thing today of coming forward and talking about it. He may not explain a lot. He may not put enough information out there to satisfy everybody. But there are these really legitimate questions out there. What was the search about? Why did it have to be done? And why did it have to be done that way on that day?
Well, Josh, I like what you said, where it's possible that no one is going to be pleased, or a very small minority, by definition, will accept that the explanation or the information that the USAG gives. Brett, I want to come back to you, and I'm reading from my email, so forgive me. This is from ABC Sourcing. Former President Trump receiving a subpoena in the spring for documents related to what the former president is believed to have failed to turn over to federal investigators. And this is according to sourcing familiar with the matter, obviously telling ABC News. So it's not immediately clear what specifically the subpoena was seeking, whether or not Trump provided any documents in response to the subpoena. But the point is, the subpoena came in the spring. It played a role in this visit by these federal investigators in June, according to our sources. Does that shed any light or allow you in some way to anticipate what the USAG may say?
Yes, because Josh mentioned this earlier, is that in a case like this, you go through sort of procedural steps from just asking. That didn't get anywhere. Providing a subpoena, presumably that didn't get anywhere. Maybe it did a little bit, maybe it didn't. And then not complying with that, then you go to a search warrant. And that would be used as a justification in the probable cause affidavit, because you do need to show the judge that you've tried other ways to get these documents, and they clearly have, and maybe some that we don't even know about, of contacting Trump's lawyers, I'm going to guess multiple times, saying, hey, we know these documents are there. He's admitted that he has classified documents there, and that they have to be turned over. And of course, I think there was a lot of okey-doke talk about, you know, yes, we'll get to that, and obviously they never got to it for who knows what reasons. But that's why you ended up with a search warrant.
Jeff, bringing you in from the legal perspective that Brad just referenced, I mean, if you were representing the former president, I suppose it's conceivable that somebody said, you know what, just ignore this, let this issue be forced, and now we're at the point where it's forced. Is that your read?
Yeah, that would be unwise advice if anybody gave that to him. This chapter may be called, you know, third time's a charm. He left the White House with boxes and boxes of documents that were illegal for him to remove. Then they asked him, the government asked him to please return it. They went down and they retrieved, 15 boxes or so early in the year. They found that they were incomplete. They issued a subpoena. There was a meeting at Mar-a-Lago. Trump's lawyers said, oops, here are some classified documents. That's it, apparently. Then it turns out, lo and behold, that's not it, which is what seems to have necessitated a search warrant, as has been said by Brad and by Josh. They tried the subpoena route. They hoped, evidently, that the subpoena would be complied with. It didn't work. Hard to imagine that the former president would dissemble about whether or not he was withholding documents. I know we're all shocked by the totally speculative thought that he might have done that. But if he thought that the Department of Justice was just going to be sort of subjected to rope-a-dope, evidently he bet wrong.
So basically the legal equivalent of just letting your car run until it hits a brick wall.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Zareen, bringing you back on the political messaging of this, as we go towards the midterms, we know there is so much vitriol on social media, quite frankly, on both sides. How is this going to frame the political conversation going forward?
What I think is so striking is the fact that you don't just have Trump supporters coming out and saying that, you know, a reason needs to be provided. You have people who aren't exactly for Donald Trump who've been speaking out. You had Larry Hogan, for example, someone who's been harshly critical of the former president, who in a written statement this week said if the federal government cannot ultimately provide overwhelming evidence that action was absolutely necessary, it will only undermine faith in democracy. And that's prompted a lot of people to maybe question, okay, well, what was the reason? And perhaps that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the Attorney General speak in just a few moments. But you're right, the amount of tension in this country is at such an incredible high right now, right? I mean, you have Kevin McCarthy, who's been saying if they actually take back the House, that they would start an investigation into the Attorney General, the very person we're going to hear speaking in just a few moments. So we'll see if his words right now, if they're able to ease any of that tension, if they're able to maybe cause a little calm, because that's certainly something that's really needed right now.
Indeed, and with people more or less deciding on which facts to believe and which ones not to believe.
Exactly.
Josh, bringing you in, and I understand we're just a few moments away from Attorney General Merrick Garland making this statement. What are the chances that he makes an open plea for citizens to just not attack FBI agents in the field?
Well, I imagine that there's a very good chance that he'll do that. The FBI director yesterday was in Omaha, and he said essentially the same thing. That's certainly what they can do, and that clearly would in no way jeopardize an investigation. And certainly, I'm sure that most Americans would not want anybody hurt, certainly not a law enforcement official. That's got it. We no matter the polarized environment, we have to imagine that most people don't want people hurt, and they don't want FBI agents hurt.
And of course, as we've seen earlier, however, we have to state we have no idea if it's connected or not, but this incident in Ohio with a suspect attempting to break into an FBI office there, and we have been following that news throughout the afternoon as well, and apparently that is still an ongoing standoff, but that for the most part, the situation has been contained by law enforcement. Brad, going back to you on the next best steps as somebody who was in the field, who was doing that job, putting yourself in danger, What is the toughest part about the role in this current environment?
Being able to continue to focus on your job, keeping in mind to protect yourself and your family. I'll give you one sort of maybe interesting insight. During the DC sniper case, where they were randomly shooting people from a distance away, I mean, it even affected all of us. And I had 4 guns in my car. And when I pumped gas, I got behind pillars because they had shot people in gas stations. So will agents change their behavior? And the answer is they probably will. I mean, we have this situation that's still ongoing outside Cincinnati, but I'll be surprised if we don't have more versions of that. And clearly going after individual agents would, sadly be the easier thing to do because you don't have to confront a building and multiple people armed inside that building. So you got to be vigilant, focused, but you still have to do your job.
Brad, thank you for that. I just want to remind our viewers, if you are joining us now, we are following breaking news. We are waiting for Attorney General Merrick Garland to make a statement to the press. It should happen at any moment now. Sources telling ABC News that he is expected to address the FBI search conducted earlier this week at the former president's Mar-a-Lago estate. And of course, we will bring you his comments as soon as he begins speaking. As we wait, though, we do bring back our Chief Investigative Reporter Josh Margolin, ABC's Zoreen Shaw, former FBI agent and ABC News contributor Brad Garrett, and Jeff Robbins, who is a litigation partner and also former Chief Minority Counsel, U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, for their takes on what we are likely to hear from the U.S. AG when he does begin speaking, as I mentioned, expected at any moment. Josh, in just a minute, I do expect the AG to walk up to that podium. What do you think we hear from him first?
First, he's likely to call for some sort of calm or people to be vigilant, not to harm law enforcement, and to understand this whole situation is serious, and despite people's political beliefs and anger at something that they feel is unjust, that they need to not act out. The situation in Cincinnati, we don't know what's at the root cause of it, but whatever it is, there's always the risk that it could lead to copycats, given this really, really tense environment out there. I imagine that's the first thing we will hear from the Attorney General.
Brad, what do we know about what the FBI was looking for? Just remind us, and of course we are looking at this empty podium. We are waiting for the U.S. AG, Merrick Garland, to begin speaking. But just remind us, from what you know, what the FBI went to get at Mar-a-Lago.
It strikes me as highly classified information, information that potentially could cause severe damage to the national security of the United States. Now, keep in mind that it may be something other than just documents from the DOD, FBI, CIA that are stamped at a particular security level. I mean, if the president created documents, those also could be.
We are going
classified.
to join our ABC News broadcast team for special coverage.
It's an ABC News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good afternoon, and we're coming on the air because U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland is about to speak for the first time since the FBI raid of former President Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. The Justice Department under intense pressure to say something to reveal details of the search warrant executed on Monday. Of course, because of the highly unprecedented nature of all of this, a search at the home of a former president. Republicans have been demanding an explanation. DOJ and the FBI have refused to comment so far, which of course is standard policy in an ongoing investigation. But the stakes here much higher, again, as I mentioned, because this involves a former president. Law enforcement sources saying the raid was related to documents, some classified, allegedly taken by the former president when he left office. Sources now telling ABC News the former president received a subpoena in the spring, possibly for these documents he failed to turn over to the National Archives. We've now learned that federal authorities were also at Mar-a-Lago in June in connection with this subpoena, and of course back again this week for the actual search. It's believed the former president could reveal more about the search himself in these recent days. His lawyers were given a copy of the warrant, which would have given some indication, obviously, of what kinds of things they were looking for. The former president unlikely to release that information. ABC News has learned that the FBI agents gave the Secret Service at Mar-a-Lago 45 minutes notice before showing up on Monday. Secret Service agents on site did not notify Mar-a-Lago staff until the FBI was actually arriving. The former president, as we reported here, and members of the Trump family were not on site at the time. We should note here, as we await the Attorney General, that in a separate case also involving the former president, it was just about 24 hours ago, the former president was deposed by New York's Attorney General in a civil investigation completely separate. Let's listen to the AG.
Good afternoon. Since I became Attorney General, I have made clear that the Department of Justice will speak through its court filings and its work. Just now, the Justice Department has filed a motion in the Southern District of Florida to unseal a search warrant and property receipt relating to a court-approved search that the FBI conducted earlier this week. That search was of premises located in Florida belonging to the former president. The department did not make any public statements on the day of the search. The former president publicly confirmed the search that evening, as is his right. Copies of both the warrant and the FBI property receipt were provided on the day of the search to the former president's counsel, who was on site during the search. The search warrant was authorized by a federal court upon the required finding of probable cause. The property receipt is a document that federal law requires law enforcement agents to leave with the property owner. The department filed the motion to make public the warrant and receipt in light of the former president's public confirmation of the search, the surrounding circumstances, and the substantial public interest in this matter. Faithful adherence to the rule of law is the bedrock principle of the Justice Department and of our democracy. Upholding the rule of law means applying the law evenly, without fear or favor. Under my watch, that is precisely what the Justice Department is doing. All Americans are entitled to the even-handed application of the law, to due process of the law, and to the presumption of innocence. Much of our work is by necessity conducted out of the public eye. We do that to protect the constitutional rights of all Americans and to protect the integrity of our investigations. Federal law, long-standing department rules, and our ethical obligations prevent me from providing further details as to the basis of the search at this time. There are, however, certain points I want you to know. First, I personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant in this matter. Second, the department does not take such a decision lightly. Where possible, it is standard practice to seek less intrusive means as an alternative to a search and to narrowly scope any search that is undertaken. Third, let me address recent unfounded attacks on the professionalism of the FBI and Justice Department agents and prosecutors. I will not stand by silently when their integrity is unfairly attacked. The men and women of the FBI and the Justice Department are dedicated, patriotic public servants. Every day, they protect the American people from violent crime, terrorism, and other threats to their safety while safeguarding our civil rights. They do so at great personal sacrifice and risk to themselves. I am honored to work alongside them. This is all I can say right now. More information will be made available in the appropriate way and at the appropriate time. Thank you.
All right, that's the Attorney General Merrick Garland at the Department of Justice.
Thank you all for your questions, but as I said, this is all I can say at this time.
We expected that that would be his answer to any questions following his news conference here moments ago, where he did not take questions, but again made significant news here as you were watching our live coverage. The Attorney General Merrick Garland saying, let me make clear, the Department of Justice will speak through court filings and its work, which is what he said when he took this post. He said just now the Justice Department has filed a motion in the Southern District of Florida to unseal that search warrant and property receipt relating to a court-approved search that the FBI conducted earlier this week. So again, the Attorney General working to unseal the warrant that allowed FBI agents to search the former president's home in Mar-a-Lago in Florida. That would, of course, reveal a lot more information to the American public and to those who've been calling for more details into this highly unprecedented move by the Attorney General. He said in sticking to what he declared from the very beginning as AG, that they would not talk except through their work, their court filings. He pointed out before offering this information today that it was the former president himself, Donald Trump, who talked about this search, not the Department of Justice, the day of the search. He said it was the former president's right to do so. He went out of his way, Merrick Garland did, to say we made no public comments on the day of the search. He also reminded the audience something that we have been reporting here at ABC News, that a warrant was given to the former president's legal team, that probable cause was shown in court before that magistrate, before this search played out. That they were given a property receipt. This is something else that we have reported on here that would list the items taken from the property. So again, the former president has this information, could share it with the public, knowing that there are so many questions out there, particularly from Republicans and from supporters of the former presidents, though we knew that that was unlikely to happen from the former president. I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. John, the Attorney General, very quiet by nature and by precedent with the Justice Department. It took a lot for him to come forward today, but this motion has been filed, and this is significant to unseal the warrant.
He was under intense pressure to say something about this, given the highly unusual situation we are in of a former president being apparently the subject of a criminal investigation, or at the very least the subject of a search warrant. We had said, David, you and I had talked from the very beginning that Donald Trump had a copy of this warrant, also had a copy of this itemized list of items that were taken. His lawyer initially acknowledged that. It's interesting, though, that his son, Eric Trump, who's been speaking on his behalf for some of this, actually denied that he was given that. So I think this goes to show that we have to be very careful in questioning the reliability of the information that is coming from the Trump camp. That was a case where something was flatly wrong. The president's son said something that was just not true. We will see this warrant. It will have some very basic information about what they were looking for and the reasons for it. And then, of course, the list of documents that were taken. Two notes on this, though. One, as you and I discussed yesterday, there is a third filing, which is a sworn affidavit that was given to the judge to explain the reasons why there would be probable cause that evidence of a crime or crimes would be uncovered with a search of this premises. That document will remain sealed. Merrick Garland made no mention of unsealing that document. The second point is about the invoice, about the list of items that were taken. I would not expect this to be overly detailed when you consider that this is classified. This is about classified information. This investigation is about classified information that was allegedly improperly removed from the White House. Obviously, the nature of classified information is they're not going to be able to give us much in the way of detailed information about what exactly it is. But this is a significant move by the Attorney General that really underscores the extraordinary circumstances. He said it himself, that this, given the incredibly high stakes, substantial public interest in this matter. That's an understatement, substantial public interest in this matter. That there are not just Republicans, but across the country, including some very prominent Trump critics, thought it was important for the Department of Justice to come out and explain, at least in some basic way, why they did what they did.
John Karl with us here on the Breaking News. John, our thanks to you. The Attorney General Merrick Garland moments ago revealing to the American people that they have moved to unseal the search warrant that led to the search at the former president's home in Mar-a-Lago. He made a point, Merrick Garland did again, that the former president has in hand the search warrant, or his legal team, certainly. The former president has seen it by now. In addition to that, a list, a property receipt, if you will, a list of the things, and as John Karl points out, probably in limited detail, but certainly certainly a list of the things taken from Mar-a-Lago. That's a significant amount of information the former president has in hand and has had that now for several days, could offer that to the American people if they wanted, amid these questions about what, in fact, the DOJ, the FBI was looking for there. Something else that we heard from the Attorney General, he said just moments ago, I personally approved this search. He took responsibility. He said, I don't take this lightly, these kinds of searches. We would certainly try to get answers or material, property that they're in search of through other means, if possible, before taking this certainly dramatic and highly unprecedented step to search a former president's home. I want to bring in our senior justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, with us on the phone here. You've covered Merrick Garland. You've interviewed Merrick Garland under significant pressure to say something today, but he made a point that this motion has been filed, again, talking about something that's happening through the court system, which is what he said he would only speak to all along here.
David, this is a highly unusual situation. Clear that the Attorney General wanted to address this head on. And to me, having covered him, the most important thing he said was that normally in a situation like this, they would use less aggressive methods than they used on Monday. So he made it clear that they had a significant and perhaps profound reason to conduct the search in the way that they did. The other thing that he wanted to go out of his way to clearly indicate is that he's very concerned about these threats and these accusations against the FBI. But clearly, this situation, David, is one in which these documents, the Justice Department does not believe that they have all the documents that they wanted, that they requested, and they're hell-bound on getting them.
You make a valid point there, Pierre. Pierre, thank you. I want to bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, to pick up on that. Dan, you heard Pierre make the point, and Merrick Garland said this, the Attorney General, that this is sort of a last case resort here to actually search a former president's home, that they would have taken other methods, other routes to get the information, get the answers they were looking for. This was a significant point that he wanted to make and ups the stakes, certainly, with at least what has yet to be reported out, but what was going on between the former president and the Justice Department in the weeks and months leading up to what we saw at Mar-a-Lago this week.
And I think one of the most important points here is something that ABC News is reporting today in connection with that, which is that there was a subpoena issued for documents there. We don't know exactly what documents. We don't know exactly what happens. But that's a critical step here, because a lot of questions were being asked. Why this level? Why do you need to have the FBI going into his home with a criminal search warrant? Why not use less intrusive means? Why not subpoena documents? Well, now we know that documents were subpoenaed. And that leads you to believe that there likely was a dispute after that point about certain documents that maybe were not turned over, et cetera. We'll have to see. But I will caution everyone that I think that when this search warrant is released, it will still be somewhat unsatisfying, in the sense that, yes, we may know the crimes that they were investigating. And I think that'll be the single most important thing in the search warrant, is look for which crimes they're investigating. Number one issue. Beyond that, what documents they took are going to be pretty broad and vague, is my guess, in terms of looking at the receipt of the documents. The other kind of information that will be in the search warrant, we'll talk about the address and what sorts of stuff they're allowed to take from the home. But beyond the crimes that are being investigated, the warrant itself will likely have a limited amount of information. And so I do think that even if and when this warrant is unsealed, there are still going to be a lot of questions to be answered.
Kind of you to prepare us for that. A lot of reporting in the weeks and months to come, certainly on this. But Dan, just to underscore what you said there, the idea that Catherine Falders Johnson, two-chair team, reporting earlier today from ABC News that there had been a subpoena several months ago, which leaves the window here of opportunity for the former president to hand over what the Department of Justice was looking for, that this search that we saw at Mar-a-Lago obviously didn't have to happen, Dan.
A subpoena is a requirement. It doesn't leave you the option of not delivering the documents. And if they had information that, despite a subpoena, And the subpoena didn't come out of nowhere either, right? The subpoena comes after there's already questions about, well, why were these documents at Mar-a-Lago? Okay, now we have to go through and figure out, do we have everything? Then they issue a subpoena, apparently saying, we need additional documents that you haven't turned over. It would sure seem that they didn't still get those documents that they needed, that they wanted, that they believed belonged to the government, et cetera, and that is why they went in. But that's the sort of detail that we aren't going to quite get from just the search warrant being unsealed.
And real quick, Dan, a lot of people, and these are appropriate questions, are asking all of this over documents, but we still simply do not know the level of what we're talking about here. We know this involved classified documents, but again, those are questions that are very difficult to answer this early on.
Absolutely. But I do think that it elevates it when you have a subpoena, meaning the initial concern was you have the FBI going into Donald Trump's home to just retrieve some documents? Couldn't they have figured this out in some other way? And now you have to ask the question, A, how important were the documents? That remains something, as you point out, we don't know. But if they are very important, very top secret, very classified documents, and they had specifically requested documents like this, and for whatever reason they weren't being turned over, now the situation all becomes elevated. Now you're not just talking about, well, this is a record-keeping issue. Now you're talking about a potential issue of hiding documents. And then the question becomes, what's in the documents and why are they being hidden? But again, we don't know that yet. But those are the sorts of questions that I'm asking in my head.
And we'll continue to ask, and we certainly never want to get ahead of ourselves here. Dan Abrams, our thanks to you as always. We'll see you a little later on the newscast. And in the meantime, I want to bring in our investigative reporter, Aaron Katersky, on one other note that we're following today. And this came out of Ohio. Certainly, we don't know if there's any link to what we witnessed at Mar-a-Lago earlier this week, but there is heightened concern. And you heard it from the Attorney General there moments ago, Aaron, saying any kind of attacks, verbal or otherwise, on the FBI, the DOJ, on prosecutors will not be tolerated. And there's this unfolding investigation, the situation in Ohio today, where authorities say it would appear someone tried to cause a lot of problems, and that's to put it lightly, with the FBI office in Cincinnati.
A man armed with a nail gun and an AR-15 is alleged to have attacked the FBI office in Cincinnati and then led the authorities on a chase along Interstate 71, firing shots from his Ford Crown Victoria before heading off the interstate, firing more shots, exchanging fire with law enforcement. There is now an armed standoff in a cornfield near Wilmington, Ohio. It's believed to be contained there, but this standoff is ongoing. It's not clear what his motivation was, David, but one of the reasons that Merrick Garland decided to break from his long-standing tradition of not talking about ongoing investigations unless and until there are criminal charges is because of what he called these unfair attacks on the FBI.
Yeah,
David.
Of course, again, as you point out, the motive not known, but it comes, of course, just days after the country witnessed that play out at Mar-a-Lago. Aaron Katersky, our thanks to you. And again, the big headline here, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States, telling the American people moments ago the Justice Department has filed a motion now in the Southern District of Florida to unseal that search warrant that led to the search at Mar-a-Lago, which would provide the American people with a lot more information about that highly unprecedented search. Our coverage will continue on ABC News Live, abcnews.com, and as I mentioned there, I'll be back with the entire team a little later today for World News Tonight. I'm David Muir in New York. Until then, good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Bolton, you just heard from Attorney General Merrick Garland addressing the FBI's search executed at Mar-a-Lago this week, announcing that the Justice Department filed a motion to unseal the search warrant executed on former President Trump's resort, as well as a list of the items that investigators seized as part of the search. Garland said he personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant and noted that the Department of Justice does not take such decisions, lightly. For more and their reaction, we bring in ABC's Zareen Shah, chief investigative reporter Josh Margolin, former FBI agent and ABC News contributor Brad Garrett, and former chief minority counsel, U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, Jeff Robbins. Thank you, one and all. Jeff, I'd like to start with you. What does this mean, unsealing the warrant? How long does that take? What are the next steps?
Well, it really is a bit of jujitsu, in effect, executed here by the Department of Justice, because, of course, the former president and his supporters have ignored the fact for the last several days that they had the search warrant, they had the invoice, the receipts of what was taken, and so rather than inject this notion of a raid and the great mystery and it was secret and all the rest of it, they could easily have simply disclosed that to the public. They chose not to. Rather, they chose to foment all of this suspicion in a way which I think was probably quite concerning to the Department of Justice, hence this unusual statement that he made. Now, the Department of Justice has said, okay, fine, you've confirmed that you have received this, and therefore, we will move to unseal, to make available to the public that which you have declined to make available to the public. And that will be the search warrant application, the search warrant, I should say, and the receipt. It will not contain the showing of probable cause. It will not contain the detail that supported the finding that there was the probable cause to believe a crime was committed and the basis for that. But this little move by the Department of Justice was dignified. He did it in a calm way, as is his style. But make no mistake, in a way, he has turned the tables on some of these people who've been out there alleging all sorts of things on the part of the Department of Justice and the FBI.
Hold that thought. We want to bring in Jonathan Karl, ABC News chief Washington correspondent. So, John, what did you make of the AG's statement?
Well, I think this shows that there was incredible pressure on the Department of Justice to say something about what was going on. You had on one side the Trump team saying all kinds of things, some of it, almost certainly not true, describing the FBI's action on Monday in Mar-a-Lago as essentially an invasion of the president's home, an occupation of the president's home, and even raising, allegations about what the FBI may be doing down there to fabricate evidence against the president. I mean, really, they had to come out and say something, and I thought it was a very measured, calm statement. Garland, the DOJ generally does not comment on ongoing investigations. He really did not comment on this one, except to say that they would make this motion to unseal the warrant and the list, the invoice of property taken from Mar-a-Lago. This is something that people have been calling on Donald Trump to release. We've asked the Trump team if they would release this because there was never anything preventing this. So instead of talking and making accusations, show us what you've got, because this warrant will provide some very basic details about what the Department of Justice was looking for in seeking this search warrant, and what they ended up taking out of Mar-a-Lago. Now, this is not going to be a full explanation of everything regarding this case. There's another document that had to go to the judge to get the warrant in the first place, and that's an affidavit that would outline the case for probable cause. Because again, the Justice Department has to make the case that there is probable cause that a search will uncover evidence of a crime or crimes committed. That document's going to remain sealed, but at least with the warrant, we'll see, what the potential crimes were, what laws were potentially broken, what they were searching for, what they ended up taking out. So I think a significant move, and really something we wouldn't have seen except for the extraordinary circumstances surrounding this case. Now, one other point, Deirdre, is that this is a filing with the court to unseal those documents, the invoice and the warrant. It doesn't release it on its own. The judge has to be the one that releases it. And the Trump team will have a right to object to the release. And it'll be very interesting to see how they handle this. Will they object? Of course, as has been said, the Trump team doesn't need a court order to release the documents. They can release them now. So this will be a very interesting thing is to watch how the Trump legal team responds to this.
Jonathan, thank you as always for your excellent coverage. Jonathan Karl joining us there. And Jeff, I want to point out, or rather just follow up with what Jonathan Karl was just telling us. I mean, it is worth noting that this filing by the DOJ contemplates this possibility that Trump may object to the release of the search warrant. So we heard Merrick Garland say the former president should have an opportunity to respond to this motion, to lodge objections, including with regards to any legitimate privacy interests or the potential for other injury if these materials are made public. So that suggests the magistrate will not act to immediately unseal. Jeff, what are your thoughts on, first of all, whether or not the former president's team wants to release this, wants to prevent its release, obviously two extremes, and then the what happens next component?
Yeah, there's been so much use of the word flush in connection with these records that truly is unprecedented. And one of the things that will now happen is that the president's position, former president's position, will be flushed out. He will be forced to say in a public filing whether or not he objects to these documents being unsealed. And if he objects to them being unsealed, you might imagine that there would be some fair-minded people who will say, well, you can't have it every which way. You can't allege that something nefarious has happened here, and they never should have. They had no basis for getting a search warrant, and there was nothing to find, and at the same time object to the search warrant and the receipt of materials taken being disclosed. Now, it would not be the first time that this particular individual, former President Trump, has taken several different sides of the same position, but it will be interesting to see exactly, as you've said, Deirdre, whether or not he and his lawyers object to the disclosure of these documents.
It's riveting. It's unprecedented. There's a lot of superlatives we can pull in. We also want to bring in ABC News senior investigative reporter Aaron Kotarski. So, Aaron, how long is it going to take procedurally, mechanically, to unseal these documents?
Well, it can happen in a snap, but first the former president has to decide, Deirdre, whether he's going to object to the motion. There is in the Justice Department's motion to unseal the search warrant and the property record that the Attorney General spoke of, there is an opportunity for the former president and his legal counsel to object. So if they do that, as your other guest was explaining, that may throw this for a bit of a wrench. On the other hand, if it's unopposed, the judge can order it unsealed, and it's immediately put on the public docket, and we can see what the what the documents contain. There's also something called attachments A and B, which the Justice Department wants unsealed. It's not immediately clear what those might be, in addition to the warrant itself and the property record.
Thanks for that, Aaron. Zorine, bringing you here on the White House. Is there a response? Can we expect to hear one?
No response yet. And remember, Biden is on vacation, so we may not get one. I mean, the last we heard from Biden, he was talking about inflation yesterday, and then he went off to vacation. What I thought was interesting from the AG statement, he said the first thing he said that he wanted to make clear was that he personally approved this warrant. He did not mention Biden's name once. He did not talk about the current president. And you've heard a lot of people ask, did the White House know? Were they given a heads up? The White House press secretary has had to respond and say, that they really had no heads up on this, that they didn't know about it. So I did think that was one interesting point that was also brought up. And then you heard the AG go on to say, aside from the fact that he personally approved the warrant, that he does not take these decisions lightly. And of course, he ended by saying he will not stand silently by the FBI while the FBI and DOJ gets attacked. And he says, that he wouldn't take any additional questions. I'm sure there were many pertaining to, the specific details, but he simply just wasn't authorized to say any more.
Zorine, thank you one and all. Please stay with me. We are just going to take a very quick break. We'll have more news after this.
Tonight Tonight, former President Trump's long list of legal battles, plus the monkeypox outbreak. Just how bad is it getting? More Americans turn to World News Tonight with David Muir, the most watched program on all of television.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty on 4 counts of fraud, facing the possibility of decades in prison. Now, we take you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes. The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes on trial. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Boy Scouts knew they had a problem.
Parents gave the Boy Scouts the most valuable thing they had, their children. And they told parents, you can trust us.
They're unbelievably heartbreaking stories. So many of them are haunted by who they would have become if this never happened to them.
This is about how to move from victim to survivor.
When the detective says he confessed to abusing, I no longer had to prove to people that I was abused. I was free.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
As a professional athlete, you want to do stuff that's awe-inspiring, death-defying.
I continue to chase that feeling, but there's an absolute moment of leap of faith.
To be an elite adventure athlete, you have to push past the fear to achieve a transcendent experience. Sometimes the only way to find the edge is to go over it.
Thanks for streaming with us. I'm Deirdre Bolton. Attorney General Merrick Garland just spoke for the first time about the FBI's search executed at former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in southern Florida, citing public interest in the matter.
Much of our work is by necessity conducted out of the public eye. We do that to protect the constitutional rights of all Americans and to protect the integrity of our investigations. Federal law, long-standing department rules, and our ethical obligations prevent me from providing further details as to the basis of the search at this time. There are, however, certain points I want you to know. First, I personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant in this matter.
Garland said the government had filed a motion to unseal the underlying warrant authorizing this week's search, which Trump has sharply criticized as a partisan attack. Garland also addressed recent attacks on the professionalism of the FBI and the Justice Department agents, and saying he will not stand by silently when their integrity is unfairly attacked. Joining me now is ABC's Zareen Shah, senior investigative reporter Josh Margolin, former FBI agent Brad Garrett, and attorney Jeff Robbins. Josh, I'd like to start with you. What is the most important element that you heard that stood out to you from the USAG?
It's the most surprising one. It's that the Justice Department, in response to the public clamoring for information and comments by former President Trump and people connected to him, the Justice Department has now gone into court to try to unseal these records. He's basically he's one-upping President Trump. The Justice Department is taking the president's words. He confirms the search. He talks about it. And now the Justice Department is saying that in the substantial public interest, that they would like a federal judge to release these records so that the American public can start to see actual documents and form their own opinion based on fact as to whether or not this search was warranted and appropriate. Not everyone's going to agree, but Garland was very, very clear that this was a step in response.
This was a step in response, and as you said, Josh, really important, if for no other reason than political messaging as well as legal ones. Jeff, what does unsealing this warrant mean? What are the next steps?
So having filed the request that the judge unseal or disclose publicly the filings, or at least the filings absent the detailed affidavit in support of probable cause. It then moves to former President Trump to take a position, to oppose it, to agree to it, to take a position somewhere in the middle. But it really does flush out the president, the former president. This really is, for all of the calm and the decency and the honor of the Attorney General, and he is all of those things, as are the professionals around him. This is an outflanking, in effect, of the former president by saying, okay, no problem. If you're going to say to the public some of this stuff about how there's nothing here, there was no basis for it, nothing was obtained, and you've confirmed that you have the search warrant, you have the receipt, but you declined to make it public, we'll help you out. We'll make it public for you. Now it's up to you. Tell the judge, do you oppose us disclosing it or not? So it's a smart move, as you say, Deirdre, politically and publicly, in terms of diluting some of these attacks that have been launched against the Department of Justice and the FBI.
Jeff, we're going to pick up on what you said. Bring in ABC News senior investigative reporter Aaron Kotarski. So, Aaron, how long is it going to take to unseal these documents?
It depends on whether the former president opposes the motion to unseal the search warrant and some of the underlying documents, and then how quickly the judge can rule. The judge in Florida, though, has already told the Justice Department that it wants a response by tomorrow in a separate matter, how they feel about unsealing some of this stuff. And now we know the answer. So the judge could rule really any day now, depending on what the former president's legal team decides. And then once the judge rules, the search warrant and the documents become available on the public docket.
So it could go very quickly, it could go very slowly, it just depends.
It just depends, really, and the ball is now in the former president's court to either oppose the motion that Garland is talking about, or to allow it and then let the public again see what this search was all about. But we know there were less invasive steps that preceded the search, which is a provocative, especially politically provocative step that the Justice Department undertook. We learned today that there was a subpoena for documents and another visit by the FBI to retrieve those documents in June. It's not clear what that subpoena was about, what documents are at issue, whether they're classified, what the nature of that classification is, or anything like that. But it does show that there were less invasive steps that the Justice Department tried to take to satisfy this case before resorting to this unprecedented search.
Aaron, I think that's a great point because, as many have pointed out, there could have been a resolution to this. We have to assume at some level that the former president's lawyers advised him essentially to ignore those steps. Is that a fair conclusion?
Well, we're not sure about what legal advice the former president may be getting, but a subpoena is not optional. And I think Jeff Robbins could probably speak to this better than I, but if there was a subpoena and the former president was ordered to turn over documents, clearly the FBI was not satisfied with what it got, because on Monday they had to go down once again to the former president's South Florida residence, and they were armed with this search warrant, and we may well see, at least in some part, what it is thereafter.
Jeff did point out earlier that that would have been terrible advice, but that said, at the end of the day, the sequence of events is what we have been reporting. Zareen, is the White House responding to this at all?
They're not. In fact, in that entire, 3 to 5 minute statement that we heard from the AG at the podium, he did not say Biden's name once. He didn't talk about the current White House. He said he personally approved that warrant. But what I think is so interesting, when we have a reporter lately on the ground with Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, and he's making it about the current president. Right before the AG stood up there and spoke, Hogan said he called on the Biden administration for more transparency regarding this FBI search at Trump's estate. And he said it's unprecedented. He said they do these raids, nearly every day, but they don't normally do them on a former president. I called on the Biden administration for more transparency. And so even though Biden is staying away from this issue, this happened now 3 days ago on Monday, he is not invoking the former president's name. We've not heard him say the word Trump once. He's touting his own accomplishments. It certainly appears that people who are who want to run for president, who've expressed wanting to run for president on the Republican side. People who aren't even Trump allies are making this about Biden. They're making this about the current White House.
Jeff, coming back to you, we know the Department of Justice asking the federal court to unseal the warrant, but also for a list of items that were seized as part of the search. How much does that stand out to you?
Well, there is an inventory of what was taken. Given the nature of this particular matter, as has been pointed out, it's unlikely that you're going to have a great deal of specificity on that list. You're not going to see, I think it's fair to say, presidential orders for double cheeseburgers. You're also not going to see references to the nuclear code. So how they will finesse the listing of what they've taken will be interesting to see. But it is the case that given what has been wrongfully taken, apparently, and wrongfully withheld, apparently, in all likelihood, at least according to a federal judge, you're not going to see the kind of listing of materials that you would ordinarily see, and the way that receipt of materials taken is framed is going to reflect the particularly sensitive nature of this particular matter.
And Jeff, I know you just heard what I was discussing with Aaron, who rightly pointed out we have to assume that the FBI going to Mar-a-Lago was really a last resort, especially since we can confirm that the former president received that subpoena earlier this year.
Well, that's exactly right. That is the way this timeline looks, that documents, materials were taken, not double cheeseburger orders in January. There was an effort to retrieve documents. Documents were retrieved early in the year. It then turned out that there were documents that should have been provided by Mr. Trump and his organization weren't. That precipitated the subpoena. One might have imagined that there would have been compliance with the subpoena. As Aaron points out, it's not supposed to be optional. Compliance with federal law is also not supposed to be optional, but nevertheless, materials obviously were withheld. And it was only when the subpoena was not complied with that the Department of Justice did what it had to do, clearly, unless it was going to simply permit the former president to hold on to materials that under federal law he's not entitled to withhold.
Jeff, a bit of a parlor game question. Where will we be in 10 days?
My guess is that we're going to know more about what the basis was for the search warrant application. I say that only because the reporting of phenomenal journalists like on this network has been going full bore. And my guess is that we're going to find out more about who it was that evidently informed the Department of Justice that, guess what, surprise, surprise, when the former president said that he had complied with the subpoena, he hadn't. So my guess is we're going to learn more about that. And I'd be surprised, frankly, if it was the full 10 days that we had to wait before we learned more about that.
And Zareen, going back to you in D.C., this is a politically fraught moment, too, as we head towards midterms. What does this mean as far as some of these key races that we've been covering? What is the context?
It's going to be so hard to tell, right? But we know that that Biden has not talked about this yet, this search at Trump's estate. And we know that some of the people who want to jump in the race, Larry Hogan, I just mentioned, already has been amping up and talking about the White House and talking about Biden as it relates to this. So the president appears to be making a conscious effort to not go there. But I do want to also mention one more thing that we just saw come across. The FBI Agent Association now says, that there are threats against FBI agents, and they've released a statement basically saying that this should not be happening, that the threats recently contribute to an atmosphere where some have or will accept violence against law enforcement as appropriate. They say it's not. They released a further statement talking about that. And you heard the AG speak on that as well. He said he will not stand by silently while the FBI and the DOJ is doing their job. Clearly, this is something that is of high concern to them right now. We've already seen, we don't know if it's related, an incident breakout in Ohio, and now this statement from the FBI Agents Association.
Yeah, and we heard, of course, Merrick Garland say he will not stand by silently when the integrity is attacked. But, Zareen, what you're telling us is even underlining a more potential physical threat.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, he probably means both, right? I mean, he wants to put a sense of calm out there. He said he will not stand silently while the FBI and the DOJ while they're going through all of this, while they're just doing their job. And now you have even a stronger statement from the FBI Agents Association.
Josh, as we are talking about this, and as Zareen just mentioned, we really don't know if there is a connection between that incident earlier today in Ohio and the USAG's comments. But overall, this has been part of the vitriol, this politicization of both the Department of Justice and the FBI. How does this factor into our climate, the fact that many in our country, even people who really don't pay a lot of attention to politics, just feel like we're so split?
Well, absolutely. And in fact, the last couple of days, I've actually heard people who I know don't follow politics at all asking questions about what's going on with Trump and whether or not it was a legitimate thing. It is a legitimate question. The system is set up so that the American people can ask these questions. That is really at the core of what the Attorney General is arguing in these documents today by going to the court and saying, because of the public interest, the public should want to make sure that no matter what they feel about Donald Trump or anybody politically, that the Justice Department is not being political, that they have legitimate reasons for taking these really aggressive and intrusive actions like a search, like a federal investigation, whatever it is that they're doing. And I think it's really incumbent upon them. It was a pleasant surprise to see that the Attorney General is not simply saying more of things like, we're not going to comment. He came forward today and he said, we are going to comment. We now have called on a federal judge to release these records.
And Josh, as you pointed out earlier, I mean, this is really unusual, is it not?
Everything about this is unusual. The whole week has been one remarkable, unprecedented thing after another. It's unusual and remarkable and unprecedented that you have a former president's property raided by the FBI. Then yesterday we had, in an unrelated civil investigation, the former president spending hours pleading the Fifth Amendment, refusing to say anything on the grounds that it might incriminate him in this unrelated civil investigation. And now we have the unprecedented step of the Justice Department going to court seeking to unseal records that, as a matter of course, are never unsealed. We did the research. There was no grounds, for instance, for news organizations to go into court to try to get a judge to open up the records. We thought we might have a way in. There was no way in. This doesn't happen. But what happened this week doesn't happen.
What happened this week doesn't happen. Really well put. Of course, Josh, Brad, quickly here, the AG mentioning these attacks on the professionalism of the FBI agents. As somebody who served, what do you make of that?
Well, I think what he's trying to do is say that these are dedicated people that on some days risk their life to protect the country, and that he wanted to drive home that point. You know, unfortunately, it has nothing to do with the AG, is that the people who potentially want to harm FBI agents or folks in the DOJ won't care what AG Garland says or what anybody else says, because they're convinced that collectively the system is rigged, and it's all driven by some sort of deep state, so none of it's legitimate is the word I'm looking for. So whatever is said today won't matter with future versions of perhaps this guy in Ohio that's just mad at the FBI for totally illogical, irrational reasons, but that won't stop the next guy trying the same thing.
Brad, we thank you. Brad Garrett, Josh Margolin, Aaron Kotowski, Zareen Shah, Jeff Robbins, thank you all. We have been covering this breaking news. We'll be back in just 2 minutes with more.
Tonight, former President Trump's long list of legal battles, plus the monkeypox outbreak. Just how bad is it getting? More Americans turn to World News Tonight with David Muir, the most watched program on all of television.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty on 4 counts of fraud, facing the possibility of decades in prison. Now, we take you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes. The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes on trial. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Boy Scouts knew they had a problem.
Parents gave the Boy Scouts the most valuable thing they had, their children. And they told parents, you can trust us.
They're unbelievably heartbreaking stories. So many of them are haunted by who they would have become if this never happened to them.
This is about how to move from victim to survivor.
When the detective says he confessed to abusing, I no longer had to prove to people that I was abused. I was free.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
Seems to change just about every day.
what is it that you really want to know, need to know,
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
As a professional athlete, you want to do stuff that's awe-inspiring, death-defying.
I continue to chase that feeling, but there's an absolute moment of leap of faith.
To be an elite adventure athlete, you have to push past the fear to achieve a transcendent experience. Sometimes the only way to find the edge is to go over it.
Welcome back. It is one of the highest stakes House races of the midterm cycle. Wyoming will be the center of the political universe next week. Will crossing former President Trump prove to be a career killer for Congresswoman Liz Cheney? ABC News political reporter Brittany Shepard traveled to Wyoming to talk to voters. She has the story.
At the county fair in Cheyenne, you'll find dairy goats, cowboy boots, horse shows,
you in the gray shirt,
and even a children's magic show.
Now I'll show you guys it's gone.
You'll also find plenty of angry voters who say their Congresswoman Liz Cheney has pulled a disappearing act of her own.
After she jumped in on the January 6th thing and she jumped in on the impeachment, she was nowhere to be found. She wasn't meeting with the people. She doesn't care about us.
She has become totally obsessed with getting Donald Trump.
President Trump is a 76-year-old man. He is not an impressionable child.
It may seem obvious that Republicans in a state that Trump carried by nearly 70 points are ticked.
Thank you very much, Wyoming.
That Cheney has turned on Trump.
And it's going to cost her big time in the election.
But that's not the whole story.
She's tone deaf to even listening to us.
Myrna Burgess says Cheney's support of Biden's gun legislation is putting proof she's out of touch.
When she starts voting against the Second Amendment, that is a total deal breaker.
Do you think Liz Cheney is for Wyoming?
No,
her polling's pretty
she doesn't
low.
even live in Wyoming. She's absolutely not for Wyoming, and she is a total rhino just like her dad.
As for the charge that Cheney is MIA, Trump-backed challenger Harriet Hageman is taking aim.
I am the only candidate that has traveled around this state.
But the thing is, Cheney is in the state, evidenced by photos on social media instead of big tent rallies.
She has to have private events that are not announced to the general public because of her safety. And that's a crying shame that somebody stood up for what they believed in Congress, and they are now in a position where they have to worry about their safety and their family's safety. What she has done for Wyoming truly does matter.
State Rep Landon Brown, a Cheney surrogate, says that this race is about the existential choice facing the grand old party.
This is our Constitution. This is our history. This is what we're going to be remembered for. And that's exactly what Liz is remembering. And unfortunately, you know, everything lands in Wyoming's lap right now.
An interesting twist about Wyoming is that voters can change their party affiliation right at their polling places. That means Democrats can weigh in on Liz Cheney's race in a major way. And here in Laramie, a place progressive by Wyoming standards, it's happening.
I've never received these kind of mailers, and certainly not in this abundance for one race ever.
Laramie Democrat Connie Wilbert has received stacks of mailers urging her to make the switch. In Connie's neighborhood, Cheney yard signs are abundant. She says most belong to lifelong liberals like herself.
While I disagree with her on virtually everything else, all policies, I respect the heck out of her for taking this stand.
Voter Megan Hayes, who also made the switch, says these are unusual times. Lifelong Democrat, but registered as a Republican for the primary?
For the first time in my life, I am a registered Republican. Yes, ma'am, yes. That gave me a little bit of a rash, but I did it.
Could Wyoming Democrats save Liz Cheney's hide? Analysts at 538 say the math doesn't add up. A whopping 70% of voters in the state are registered as Republicans. And in every midterm election in the past decade, more than 80% of primary votes cast have been for GOP candidates. meaning even those who haven't declared their party affiliation likely lean red.
There was criticism of her.
University of Wyoming political science professor Jim King put it this way.
If one candidate wins by 5,000 votes, those Democrats who switched had no real sway. If the race is decided by 500 votes, well, then those people would have perhaps had an influence.
Tough odds aren't stopping some Democrats from trying.
It may not make any difference, but I just had to vote for Liz. You know, she's got a real uphill battle.
Voters in the least populous state in the country now poised to have an outsized impact on the wide-open fate of the Republican Party.
Brittany Shepard, thank you so much. I'm Deirdre Bolton. Thank you for streaming with us. More news after this.
Tonight, former President Trump's long list of legal battles, plus the monkeypox outbreak. Just how bad is it getting? More Americans turn to World News Tonight with David Muir, the most watched program on all of television.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty on 4 counts of fraud, facing the possibility of decades in prison. Now, we take you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes. The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes on Trial. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Boy Scouts knew they had a problem.
Parents gave the Boy Scouts the most valuable thing they had, their children. And I told parents, you can trust us.
They're unbelievably heartbreaking stories. So many of them are haunted by who they would have become if this never happened to them.
This is about how to move from victim to survivor.
When the detective says he confessed to abusing, I no longer had to prove to people that I was abused. I was free.
What you need to know right now on GMA3. Wildfires raging out of control force massive evacuations in France's famous wine region as former President Trump takes the fifth over and over again under oath at a 6-hour legal proceeding here at home about his business dealings.
The growing teacher shortage as American kids get ready to fill classrooms across the country. We're speaking with the president of the National Education Association. An army of support for people without homes struggling to survive, led by many folks who used to experience homelessness themselves.
We are about taking steps and investing in programs that are going to have an immediate impact now and alleviate suffering.
The actor and author taking us inside his personal mental health struggles. Zachary Levi joins us to talk about his revealing new memoir.
Plus the major milestone for this mom, grandmom, and entrepreneur, and now brand new college graduate at 85 years young. And our surprise just for her.
And Tony winner Patina Miller is here.
I know who my son is, and I know what he's capable of. I don't need nobody to tell me that. He's protected.
On the new season of Power Book 3, Raising Canaan, plus her star turn on Broadway right now.
Now from Times Square, Amy Robach and TJ Holmes with What You Need to Know.
We're on the edge of Friday. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Friday Eve for What You Need to Know. We're happy you're